Good evening, everyone. My name is Courtney, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm grateful to be here. The truth for me is that it is an honor and a privilege to do anything in service for Alcoholics Anonymous. Some people disagree with that, but I'm not the kind of person that gets invited places, and I'm definitely not the kind of person that gets invited back places. So, to be invited anywhere is a testament of this program and a higher power that's done for me what I couldn't do for myself. So I have a sobriety date. That's July 20th of 2007. I have a sponsor. That person knows that they're my sponsor. They're sometimes painfully aware that they're my sponsor when I call them and let them grow spiritually. And I'm involved in sponsoring other people in service in a general way to Alcoholics Anonymous. So as I understand, we're going to read through the doctor's opinion, and as we do that, I'm going to share a little bit about my experience, strength, and hope. And so for anybody who's new to Alcoholics Anonymous, the message that I certainly want to share is welcome. We're really glad that you're here. Sometimes new people in Alcoholics Anonymous are the only reason the rest of us behave well. So while you might not be sure about AA, what we're sure of is that we're really grateful that you're here. And the message that was given to me when I came in was, if you have alcoholism, we think we can help you. And the analogy that I always say is that when I came into AA, it felt for me like I had found people who, after having driven my car, metaphorically, driven my car into the ditch, the people that I found in AA were not people that were like, bummer, dude. The people that I found in AA were the kind of people that said, we're going to help you get your car out of the ditch. And where they really went the extra mile is they were kind enough to tell me, this is not the first time you're going to drive your car into the ditch. So that's what I mean by that is that this is a program that my life depends on, and I desperately have to work it like my life depends on it. And I got a whole head that tells me that's not the case, right? So if you're an alcoholic like me, when you get to this chapter called The Doctor's Opinion, you might be thinking stuff like, it's just one doctor. You might be thinking stuff like, maybe I get a second opinion, right? And so we're going to do tonight what was done for me, which was to go through this line by line. So on Roman numeral XXV, or 25, it says, the doctor's opinion. And it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some stories and my experience. So I'm going to share some stuff that was shared from me. Now, most of this stuff is shared by people in AA. So there's a chance that I might say this is what they told me, and they might be wrong, right? I'm not an AA historian, but the first thing that they asked me to do is when we read this letter, there's going to be two letters from the same doctor in this chapter. And they said, compare the first one to the second one, right? So the doctor who's been helping drunks for a really long time, this is his professional letter. So the first one says, to whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. Okay, so now time out. This letter is written by a doctor, not a drunk, but he helps drunks. Who he's talking about is Bill, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, already in this paragraph, I recognize that I'm grateful for Bill. Well, why am I grateful for Bill? Well, I'm so selfish that if I had gotten the nugget of sobriety after trying to be sober many times and finding time after time that I couldn't quit and I couldn't stay quit, I would not be inclined to give this thing away, right? That I think that if I was Bill or I was Bob, I would have been like, thanks, and tried to take it out, right? Now that's important because without this idea that helping other people helps my recovery, we don't really have Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So the letter continues. So this is Dr. Silkworth telling us what he knows about Bill, what he knows about drunks. So he says, I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods had failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Now, as we know, Silkworth was like in the trenches trying to help drunks, right? So for him to make any sort of statement about an organization or a group of people who were able to impact the problem of alcoholism better than the medical profession is a huge risk, right? So the fact that he's speaking in a positive way about what Bill's doing is really remarkable, right? So you have to remember this is like the 1930s. The ideas around drunks is you can lock them up in jails or prisons, you can throw them in an asylum, or you can let them die drunk on the streets, right? So it's not like today where most people, although maybe have weird ideas, they've at least heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So that's the first letter. We're going to just like bookmark that. And it goes on. So after the letter, now on XXVI or 26, it says, the physician who at our request gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life. Now, I certainly was given the message that I was maladjusted to life, right? So I was the third kid, and I have two older brothers, and all my mom really wanted was a baby girl. And then we had some problems, right? Because I was much more interested in mud puddles and getting in fights and blackout rages by like first grade, right? So the idea that I was maladjusted to life was certainly ingrained in my behavior, right? I was also really upset that I had to wear a plaid culotte to school every day, right? And if you don't know what a plaid culotte is, it just means you didn't go to Catholic school, right? So I hated my outfit, but I had like beautiful braided hair or these nice curly pigtails. I was like this beautiful little girl and absolutely rageful and very thirsty is the point, right? So by the time I put a drink into my system, I was solving problems I couldn't even articulate yet, right? So this idea when people who are professionals say, hey, you got a drinking problem, for me it sort of felt like, and that's why you have letters behind your name? What a genius, right? My problem wasn't necessarily identifying the problem. My problem was I have no way to know what to do about this thing, right? So it goes on. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. So here we have the first indication that alcoholism isn't a disease of not trying hard enough. Alcoholism isn't a disease of you had a messed up family. Alcoholism isn't a disease of you just didn't shoot your shot at the right time, kiddo. What is implied there is the first indication that what we have is an allergy. Okay? Now, when I got here, there was a lot of talk about the allergy. And people tended to talk about like, if I'm allergic to strawberries, I just can't have strawberries. Which is an analogy that for me only went so far, right? Again, I knew that if I drank, bad stuff happened. But I couldn't make the connection because I didn't have any desire to go out and get myself some strawberries, you know? Like, I didn't have this, like, underlying urge to get my strawberry fix, even though I was going to break out in hives or choke or die, right? So it was an analogy that just didn't quite land on me. And the only reason I'm sharing that is because the longer you stick around in Alcoholics Anonymous, the more this stuff makes sense. So if stuff is like causing you more questions than answers, I invite you to just keep coming back and find out if what we're saying is actually true and it actually works for you. So it goes on to say the doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may of course mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account, right? So what do we mean by this allergy? Since the strawberry thing only got me so far, right? Well, what that means is if I put alcohol into my system, the reaction that I have is going to be different than maybe like a normal drinker, right? So that means if I put alcohol into my system, I can look at what happened next, right? I put alcohol into my system. One thing that happened next, I drank more. And I didn't just drink more, I drank it all. And then when I ran out, I found ways to go get more, right? I was trying to quench a phenomenon of craving, right? And that happened as soon as I put alcohol into my system. Now today, I haven't had a drink in 13 years. That's cool, but I am no less allergic to that alcohol today than I was then, right? So the truth for me is that once I get alcoholism, I'm powerless over alcohol, and that doesn't go away, right? I'm just as powerless over booze today as I was when I came into the rooms then. So understanding what it is I have is a pretty big deal, and so that's one aspect of it. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as an altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery and befogged. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. Now, that's just a little bit of a tidbit that's helpful for us in terms of like how we're going to go carry the message, right? I understand it's weird times in pandemic world, but I think generally we're wise to reflect on how we, as alcoholics in recovery inside of AA, actually carry the message. Do we actually go out to the places where their brains are very jittery and befogged, like detoxes? And do we let them know that we exist? Do we let drunks know who are experiencing the same things that we did, that we have a solution? That we understand what it's like to be in detox when it's really your mom's fault, and if you only knew what it was like to be you? I'm just saying that I think that we get really comfortable in our seats of Alcoholics Anonymous, letting the drunk find us, right? So now, this is the big reveal. We've got the second letter. How am I doing, Steve? We good? Okay, this is the second letter. Okay, so now we're going back. So the print gets skinnier, the margins get thinner, and that means somebody else is talking. So again, it's this Dr. Silkworth guy who's helped a bunch of drunks. He's a doctor. He's a professional. He knows everything about it. And this is his second letter. And so what I invited us to do is think about how the first letter compares to the second. So this is what Silkworth says second time around. The subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. Silkworth's getting deep now, right? This is serious business. He says, I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. Now, what they told me when they read me this book was that, well, first they said, what's moral psychology? I guarantee you I made something up. I guarantee you it was long-winded. I guarantee you I believed every word I said. And they said, no. Moral psychology you can think of, this is what they told me. I don't know if it's true, but I wrote it in my book. It said truthful thinking, right? So imagine you go to Courtney and you're like, hey, Courtney, every single time you drink Red Bull and vodka, you get in a fight with a football player and you win. And he is emasculated, and you also run out of money, and when you walk home, you fall over and you just pass out on a random sidewalk in New Orleans. Do you think that maybe stopping drinking is a good idea? Now, truthful thinking would say, well, gee whiz, that is a pretty good idea if I cut it out, right? And so what Silkworth is saying, if you try to just talk therapy me, if you try to just say, hey, Courtney, your drinking's not working, I'll tell you, sure, but I'm not going to change, right? So he's recognizing the limitations of the therapeutic whatever he has at his fingertips. So, what with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care in this hospital, and while here, he acquired some ideas, which he put into practical application at once. Now, if you're an alcoholic and you're new and you have some ideas that you want to put into practical application at once, I will give you the suggestion that they gave me when I was new. And that was, get with somebody after the meeting and tell us what your plan is. Okay? If you're new to AA, we know that you have a plan. And we want to hear about it. And you can upgrade that plan for free tonight with somebody who's worked the 12 steps. I promise you. So tell us what your plan is if you're new. Says later, now I'm going back to the book, so it's like the last bigger paragraph on XXVII, so that's 27. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving, we consented. I could understand the misgiving. I could. Have you ever given a drunk a microphone? Yeah, we're in it right now. It's dangerous. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. Now, before I read the last bit of that paragraph, in the margin of my book, I have the words, a good meeting. So what I'm about to read, I believe, is a pretty good description of what you want in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says, the unselfishness of these men as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and warily in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves, and still more, in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. If you can find that in your home group, I think that's fantastic. My experience is that I've been able to find that in many meetings all across the country. So it says, next, of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. So, all that means is you can't work the 12 steps if you're still drunk. If you're still drunk, it's okay. We're glad you're here. If you're just coming out of a blackout, welcome. Happy to see you. But you can't work the 12 steps when you're still drunk. Now, there's a ton of value in step 0, right? What do I mean by that? I mean that I had to drink every drop. I had to drink every drop of alcohol that I did before I got here. Should I have gotten sober sooner? Well, you ask my mom, she'll tell you, yeah. You ask my friends, they'll tell you, yeah. Could I have gotten sober sooner? I don't believe so. How do I know? I know because I didn't get sober to live life. I know that I didn't come to Alcoholics Anonymous to get sober. I came for one more demonstration that you people weren't going to work. So I came to Alcoholics Anonymous only because I couldn't stop drinking. So step 0 has a lot of value. The next paragraph, so it's XXVII, so we're on 25. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So, a temperate drinker is not me, right? A temperate drinker is probably my mom, right? Probably somebody who knows how many drinks they've taken, probably someone who doesn't finish a drink, whatever that is, right? And so when we say, this is like an important thing, right? It's important. This is an opportunity for me, who's coming into Alcoholics Anonymous because I can't stop drinking, wondering if you people can really help me, because I don't know, right? I don't necessarily trust a lot of people who don't drink, right? So far, you guys are just a bunch of people who don't drink. And I think that that's sketchy. So if I'm really going to stay here, can I identify? And I think that this is a really important thing to ask myself. This action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy. What does that mean? That means when you put alcohol into your system, can you stop abruptly? Can you put it down? Can you think, oh, I got to get up early in the morning for work. I better stop. Can you meet a friend at the bar for a drink, right? Could you have even 2 or 3 and stop, right? So for me, the thing that always came to mind was I was like a daily maintenance drinker, right? And so I lived in New Orleans, and I could see my favorite bar out of my bedroom window. And it was open 24 hours a day, and drinks were $1. And I spent all my money there and was always broke. So you do the math, right? And so one like random weekday afternoon, I was meeting a friend for a drink at this classy establishment that had dollar well drinks, right? That was open 24 hours a day. And I knew that I could probably talk him into a second drink, but that wasn't going to be enough. So what I did, because I'm smart and I solve my own problems, is I got there early. And I ordered a drink, and I sucked it down, and I got rid of the evidence, and he came, and he sat, and we had one drink, and at the end of one drink, I said, how about another? And then he said, why can't you just have one? Which was offensive, right? It was offensive because I had gone to all of that care to make sure that he wasn't going to call me on it, and that he's obviously out of line if he's raising a red flag at 2 drinks, when in fact I've really had 3, but hidden one that he doesn't know about. So clearly he is the idiot, and he needs to be removed from the scenario, right? So this is what I think about being the chronic alcoholic, right? This is what I think of what the manifestation of the allergy looking like, right? These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. Now, if you're a drunk like me, you want to just pause there for a second and say things like, define safely, right? Which I'm just going to tell you is a little bit of a tell, right? Normal drinkers don't ask questions like that. Normal drinkers go, now by safely, you mean not driving drunk, right? Because I could do that, right? So when we talk about what it is that we have this allergy, but I've been talking a lot about my thinking, which we're going to get to. So, can't use alcohol safely in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. Well, now this is where I really identified. I came in and I had problems, like problems, right? And I would probably try to take you emotional hostage and tell you all about the problems, right? So now here's the truth. I understood that drinking was a thing. I had heard that my drinking was a problem from lots of different people. But what was also going on is that there were pressing problems that I had, okay? And what do I mean by that? I mean that I had real problems with my parents. I mean that I went from an academic scholarship to failing out of school in the space of 3 years. I mean that I couldn't make a living. I wasn't employable. I mean that I had friends politely ask me not to say bad words to them in a very offensive way, and I couldn't deliver on that. I mean that I showed up at Christmas with 2 black eyes and no Christmas presents. I mean that I didn't have a driver's license. Like, I had, problems, right? I had problems. And what I was convinced of is that the reason that I had these problems was because I was a jerk. There was evidence that I was a jerk. These problems were very real. And I couldn't just make better decisions. I couldn't just not break my mother's heart, even though I wanted to, right? And so that's when that message, what we're going to do is find out if what you have is alcoholism. Because if what you have is alcoholism, we think we can help you. They didn't say those problems don't matter. What they said is, do you suffer from a disease of powerlessness, right? Now, if I'm really powerless over alcohol, that means I don't have any power. None. So that means that I'm going to be a jerk in those ways, right? And I know that that's a jump, and I know that there's resistance there. But it's important that I actually know what it is that I have. And today what that means is that I have to acknowledge that what I am is powerless over alcohol. That when things sandwiched itself in between me and my next drink, I lied, I cheated, I stole, I did all kinds of things to remove the barrier. The truth is that I had to remove the barrier. That I'm drinking to satisfy a craving that just doesn't go away. Then it says, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. Now again, they said, what's frothy emotional appeal? God only knows what I tried to say there. But here's the thing about frothy emotional appeal. Is it's actually really, it can actually be really dark. It can actually be really truthful. It can actually be really harsh, right? It can sound like my mother, who's a trained healthcare professional, saying, you have classic signs of alcoholism, and if you don't do something, you will ruin your life. Now, when we read things like frothy emotional appeal, I kind of imagine something like sort of like fluffy, right? And something sort of like feeling, right? For me, it's like some pretty girl who's like, stop for me, which was not a part of my story. No romantic problems, lots of bedwetting, wasn't a thing, right? And so that's what I think of frothy emotional appeal. But frothy emotional appeal is the people who love me, who looked me in the eye and said, you're breaking my heart. It's the people who loved me and gave me money when they knew what that was for, because the alternative was far bleaker. So frothy emotional appeal has a big effect on our loved ones. And I wanted it to work. When I said things like, this is the last time, I'm the one that wanted to believe that. And me saying things like, this is the last time, is an example of frothy emotional appeal. And so what the doctor says is it seldom suffices. What he says next is, the message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. Now, it is not lost on me all of the words in this paragraph, okay? Because what he says is that the thing that's going to interest and hold an alcoholic's attention has to have depth and weight. And then within a second, full of booze, and you're skeptic of people who are sober, and then all of a sudden he goes from depth and weight to God, there's a lot of red flags waved, right? What about God has depth and weight? What about spiritual terms has depth and weight? That, for me, at first sight, feels like frothy. It feels emotional, and it feels like you guys are going to take me behind the curtain, and then there's going to be something that's weird. Definitely people are going to hug me. I'm definitely going to be uncomfortable. So my cackles are up now. But it's almost as if he knows who he's writing to. Because the next paragraph say, if any feel that as psychiatrists directing a hospital for alcoholics we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us a while on the firing line. See the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work, and even of their sleeping moments, and the most cynical will not wonder that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. Now, what I think that sort of statement is about is that Silkworth became really clear that what he was saying, I'm a trained professional, and these guys are able to do what I haven't been able to do. Which, you imagine doing that in your job. You imagine standing up in print, making this statement, like, hey, I know that I went to school and have done this for my whole life, but this ragtag bunch of drunks that have no qualifications whatsoever are able to impact the problem way better than I ever could. This is a huge declaration, and it is a great gift to Alcoholics Anonymous, because there doesn't exist. It's either a jail, it's an insane asylum, or it's a death on the street. So a huge gift to us. So it says, we feel after many years' experience that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. That, I believe, is the strongest endorsement he offers, Alcoholics Anonymous, and every single time I read it, I get chills. Because the truth for me is that if I spent the rest of my days doing nothing but trying to help drunks, I would never be able to repay the debt. I would never be able to repay the great gift that's given to me, which is that people were here. People who the problem had been solved took the time to answer my calls, took the time to make the coffee, took the time to give me a book, did not make fun of me when they asked me if I had a big book, and I very forlornly reported no. They just gave me a little one because I was referencing a paperback book that they just told me, and they didn't tell me just keep coming back. They said things like, you need to come back. You need to come back tomorrow. Here's how. That if I work the rest of my days, there's no way I'll be able to repay that debt. And now he gets into some science stuff, right? So he says, here's a no-brainer for you. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Oh, cool. Glad you went to school and got letters behind your name for that one, you genius. Okay. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. What I love about this is that I have a question mark. I have a question mark written in the margin of this, because I don't think that's true about me when I first read it, right? I can differentiate the true from the false, is my first reading of this book. It says, to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. Now that was true. I did identify with that. Because here's the deal. Here's the thing about being powerless. What else exists? Nothing else exists. When I came in, people would say things like, one day at a time. As if I had been living my life by any other credo, right? I lived for my next drink. I was not out there diversifying my portfolio. I was creating wreckage of the future, for sure. But I lived one day at a time. That's a strengths-based approach for a drunk like me. I'm going to spend all my money today to get as loaded as I need to get to today. Whatever happens tomorrow, can't see it. Not my problem, right? So when we say one day at a time, we're actually talking to what you know. We believe you know how to live one day at a time. You got drunk one day at a time? It says that they are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. Now, I had a sponsee once when I had take folks through the steps. we do a thing around, exploring your powerlessness, right? And I ask them to remember some stuff on purpose, right? And one of the things that I ask them to remember is not just what happened when you drank, but do you have any experiences where you could not drink the way you wanted to, right? And one of my sponsees wrote about this really great articulation of what it's like to be powerless, right? So she was attending a wedding, and she knew that if she knew she was going to get in trouble because she knew she was going to drink. So this was her idea to manage it. She was sitting at one of those round tables, right? Like at weddings. And she was like, I'll just drink at the pace of the table, right? And so there's like waiters coming around, like filling people's wine glasses, right? And so she was like, I'll just look at what everyone else is doing, and that's how fast I can drink. Now, that was incredibly uncomfortable for that sponsee, right? And I can imagine the absolute pain and suffering it would be to drink as fast as like the mutants at table 9, right? And to just like I would be trying to come up with some sort of drinking game. Like I would be definitely manipulating the agreement that I had made with my previous self, because this is not cutting it, right? But we're wise to think about the times in which our drinking was interrupted. Did you ever run out? You couldn't get more? Those moments were excruciating. Sometimes those moments are far more telling about what it is to be alcoholic than when we drank the way we needed to oblivion. One thing that I like to remind new people is like, you don't have to drink again. That is true, but you also never have to run out. All right. There we go. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. Now, does anybody else believe that if they say something, it'll happen? Yeah, I did that one a lot. I did that one like, okay, it's going to be really embarrassing. Like one time I tried to give up booze for Lent. I hadn't done like Lent for a long time, but it just seemed like a good idea. And it was, pretty soon I was calling my dad and I was like, hey, the thing about Lent, like I feel like I remember in catechism class, like where you could have the thing you gave up on Sundays, right? And this was like, I wasn't even close to Sunday, right? Like I was still like on day 1, but I was just looking for a thing. Now I wanted so desperately for that to be true, right? And so the way my powerlessness looks is I'm fooling myself, right? The way it is to be alcoholic is that I put booze into my system. My body has a physical reaction, which means a lot of things. But one thing for sure is it means I will have more. The other thing that happens is I obsess about the drink, right? So that means I'm actively planning how I'm going to get it, how it's going to work, and all of those things. So when you put those two things together, I have a disease that centers in my mind. Now the truth is that thing centers in my mind whether I drink or not. Right? And so my experience of alcoholism is that it's always going to be my alcoholism is always going to be treated with something, right? I can treat my alcoholism with booze. The problem is that I will die drunk if I do that. I can treat my alcoholism with isolation, resentment, rage. I can treat my alcoholism with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And so what that means when I have a disease that centers in my mind is I have half of this brain that writes the business, right? That writes the lies, the justifications of why I can change my mind, the justifications of why it's going to be different this time. And then the other half of my brain says, that's a good idea, and signs off on it like it's absolute fact. And then what happens is I'm off to the races, I'm drunk again, I'm in the same exact experience where I've got these problems that are weighing down on me, I despair of ever solving them, I'm having crises I can't postpone or evade, Normal people don't have crises that they try to postpone or evade. They just have crises because they're victims. But what I am is an alcoholic. So most of the crises I have are self-imposed, right? If I need to drink the way that I need to drink, that means that my heart and lungs work, and the rest of it, I'm not interested in. I'm not. I'm interested into total oblivion. So it says, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with the firm resolution not to drink again. And then it tells us what we can expect. This is repeated over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. Now here's the good news, right? If you're feeling alcoholic tonight, here's the good news. To experience a psychic change is fancy language for a change in the way that you respond to the world. It's a change in the way that you think, right? Here's the other thing. You don't have to manifest that. You don't have to go out and start going to church and picking up newspapers for little old ladies and holding the door and going grocery shopping for people or driving people to the... You don't have to do that. What you have to do is stay in Alcoholics Anonymous and listen and find a sponsor who's going to read you this book and do the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the result is an entire psychic change, right? That's my belief because that's been my experience. That's been the experience of the people who went before me. That's been the experience of the people who've come after me. That experience is available to you. But if it doesn't make sense and it feels kind of creepy, that's okay. You don't have to figure out what that is in order to get it. What you have to do is stay. So it does say, on the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effect necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules, right? And so what the message there for me is what are the rules? Okay? So before I said it's just one doctor, before I said they're definitely going to give me a hug, before I said people who don't drink are sketchy, right? Now you told me there are rules. What are these rules? Well, that will be revealed, right? So the doctor goes on to say, men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal. Doctor, I cannot go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me. Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. I invite us to think about the people who've loved us. I invite us to think about the people who tried to make that frothy appeal. I invite us to think about how if they could have given us an arm, and that would have been the thing to get us sober, maybe they would have, right? I invite us to think, if you can't think of anybody who your drinking impacted, think harder, right? What I invite us to think about is that this means that we are beyond human aid. Is that there can be somebody who knows exactly every sort of like spring or hidden thing in your mind and can teach you all about understanding your mind and can teach you all about what alcohol really is, can teach you what the chemical compounds are that make it difficult for us to process sugar. And that's not going to get you sober. That's not going to keep you sober. The reason that this message is so clear is because the only thing that this guy sees to work is this thing that results in entire psychic change by the ragtag guy who got sober and just can't stop talking about himself to the other people. Go figure that that's the thing that works. What he also is pointing out is that like miracles happen, right? What he also points out is there's no reason this should work, but yet it does. And what is in the inexplicable is the loving hand of a power that's greater than me. What is in what I can't describe is a power greater than myself. Because for me, my relationship to booze was like I stepped into the ring for a fight. I knew I was going to lose. There was no way I wasn't going to get my clock cleaned. And there was also nothing you could do to get me to not go into the ring. I stepped in for that fight. I knew I was going to lose every time. And what's different for me today is that I'm in a place of neutrality, which means I'm not actively thinking, Courtney, don't get in that ring. Courtney, don't get in that ring. I know you want to get your ass beat tonight, but don't get in that ring. I'm not thinking that. I'm not actively trying to stay sober in my mind. I'm neutral. I don't think about it. It just comes. But that is a result of working the 12 steps. That is a result. That is what life is like having had an entire psychic change. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric efforts is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I have had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favorably to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to that date, and the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment, oh my God, we have too much left, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape, they were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. Steve, I'm so sorry, I turned one pages too many, okay? So here's what we're going to do. The next section of text goes into a classification of different alcoholics. There's the psychopaths. There's the type that are unwilling to admit they have a problem. There's the type that always believes they'll be entirely free from alcohol for a period of time. And then there's the manic depressive types about whom a whole chapter could be written. Here's what you need to know. None of that matters. It doesn't matter which type you are, right? The message is still the same for all the types. I'm so sorry, Steve. This is the key. Okay, I'm okay. Okay, so we're on XXX, okay? And so it says, towards the bottom, right? It says, all these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. So, for me, they were like, congratulations, you're in a very exclusive club, not everybody can be here, you're an outright mental defective, you're maladjusted to life, you're probably a manic depressive type about whom we don't want to ever hear that chapter. The point is, Courtney, what you are is alcoholic, and what we have is a solution. But in order to receive the solution, you just have to move from step 0 to step 1. What do I mean by step 0? Step 0, drunk, right? Step 1, sober. How much time? I don't care. Right now, in this moment. The best thing that I was ever told is that this is a disease of moments, right? I might be able to stay sober in this moment, and that might mean I stay sober the rest of my life, right? Because for me, this prospect of sobriety is like, I don't know what exists. I can't imagine my life without alcohol. And I also cannot imagine my life if I keep going the way that I'm going. So, on the next one, XXXI, so that's 31. What is the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. Although 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. Now they asked me, Courtney, What do you think pathological mental deterioration is? And again, I assure you, I told them exactly what it was. And they told me, and again, I don't know if it's true, but it's written in my book. They told me that all that means is he was a liar. Okay. So, he had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partly recognized his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. To me he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. Now, the thing that I always think about with this story is that sometimes we're very anxious to prove to people that we're not a jerk anymore. And sometimes we're very anxious to get to our step 9 and make those amends. And what I would say is, you're not on that step. You're not on that step for a reason. When we make amends, we're not making amends to say we're sorry. When we make amends, the people that we're making amends to are much more interested in, are we actually different? Do we actually mean what we say? Because we've said a lot of things. And we have done very little in comparison. So what Silkworth describes is his experience of this changed person, actually changed. When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis and, deciding his situation hopeless, had hid it in a deserted barn, determined to die. He was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment was a waste of effort, unless I could assure him, which no one ever could, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology, and we doubted if even that would have any effect. However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. He has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he is the finest specimen of manhood as one could ever wish to meet. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book, though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray. And so I think the Doctor's Opinion is a great chapter, and I think that what's important about it is it makes no bones about the spiritual aspect of our program. And I'm really sorry that I turned one too many pages and judged the time wrong, but thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Corey. That was great. And you stuck the landing right at 8:30. I love it.
The 12 steps evolved from the Oxford Group 4 spiritual activities, which were surrender, which became our steps 1, 2, and 3, sharing, which became our steps 4, 5, 6, and 7, amends, which became our steps 8 and 9, and guidance, which became our steps 10, 11, and 12.